And welcome to this post-election edition of the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Arcega in Washington. Well, America's political elite are doing their best to move a divided country forward towards acceptance and reconciliation in the wake of Republican Donald Trump's stunning election victory. Analysts and pollsters are also doing a bit of navel-gazing right now, trying to figure out how their predictions were so far off the mark. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone has more.
Trump owes his victory in large part to a surge of white working-class voters frustrated with economic issues, says expert Norman Eisen.
Discontent with the lingering effects of the financial collapse of 2008 and of the transformation of the American economy and the impact that has had on workers and on average folks over the past decades.
Pre-election polls gave Clinton an edge, and that will lead to a lot of soul-searching for pollsters and political analysts, says Molly Reynolds.
Were the polls asking the right questions of the right voters? Were we accurately measuring how likely voters are to vote? And just sort of really digging into what it is about the polling data that led us all to kind of make a different prediction than what was actually realized.
So, did the pollsters get anything right? Joining us now to give us their take on what happened, we're joined in Washington by two of our hardest working reporters, senior national correspondent Jim Malone, along with our political field correspondent, Katherine Gypson. I thank both of you for coming to join us for the second week in a row. You guys are at the top of the list. Jim, I'm going to give you the first shot at this. President-elect Donald Trump was not exactly what a lot of us were expecting the day after the election. What happened? How did we get this so wrong?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was there was an unseen or unforeseen surge, especially among white working class voters. And that manifested itself in a number of key states, places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those
Hillary
states
Clinton's
since 1992 have voted Democratic, okay?
Yes.
This is a big deal.
Which was
so
so
there's
surprising.
a shift there. This is actually a reforming in a way of the old Ronald Reagan coalition,
Right.
where he was able to take conservative Democrats and put them in there. So it's a rebalancing. Hillary Clinton won the state of California by 2.5 million votes. If there had been a shift of less than 100,000 votes in the states I mentioned, she would be president.
Because she did win the popular vote, is right. Now, Katherine, you were out there in the field hobnobbing with all these voters. Did we underestimate the support that Donald Trump was getting? Was that a surge or just a shift in voting patterns? What do you
Clearly,
think?
we underestimated the support. You know, and some of the Donald Trump supporters were telling me this 3-4 months before Election Day. They said, you are not going to want to follow those polls. Those polls are wrong. There's a hidden amount of support for Donald Trump
The
here.
secret Trump voter.
The secret Trump voter that we all thought was something that wasn't actually happening was happening. There was that strong support there in those states, especially in Pennsylvania.
Right. So all of a sudden, this sudden shift that we have to sort of wrap our heads around. But the other day, President Obama met for the first time with President-elect Donald Trump. How did that come across?
Well, it came across well, and even the White House spokesman said it went better than some people might have anticipated. I mean, they have a history, even though they'd never met.
This was crucially important, wasn't it? This first
It's
time
crucially
both-
important. That's what's happening at 30,000 feet. It's not necessarily what's happening throughout the country. We have protests going on throughout the country, okay? The country is still polarized. What that election map and those results tell you is we are more divided than ever. And the fact that Democrats were so surprised, they were so shocked, they expected a Clinton victory, first of all, it sent them into shock, and now they're coming out of that. But there are still some divisions in the country.
Sure.
And at the top, it's good to have set that tone, because we just traditionally do that in this country from political history. But it's going to take a bit for the country to come together.
Yes, that it will. So Donald Trump looked presidential. It was a good transition.
Right.
It seemed like the optics were just right. And then he goes ahead and makes a tweet, and he blames the media for inciting these protests.
That was the most interesting part of that entire day of Donald Trump's day in Washington, D.C.
How does that play out, though? I mean,
you know, you have this extraordinary circumstance where you have a president-elect tweeting about the protests against him. We have our first...
And saying it's unfair.
Right, and saying that it's unfair and calling the media unfair. And he also banned the travel pool from traveling with him, which is a very unusual circumstance. There's always been this small group of journalists that has traveled with the president-elect and then the president to document what he is doing. So we're seeing some really unusual things happening here right now already.
But there was a second tweet from Trump that kind of tried to undo that, and this is what we're going to see now. You have this struggle. Is he going to be the man we saw on the campaign trail, the outrageous political outsider?
We knew.
Or, like so many analysts are saying, well, once you get into that office, the office kind of subsumes you. We'll see. We don't know.
We'll see,
but we can see already the pushes and the pulls and the pressures going on.
And we see the disconnect between the public persona and the persona that we got to know over a year and a half, right?
That's right. That's right.
So what do you think the major challenges? We talked about just how deep the divisions are in this country.
Yeah.
Is that going to be challenge number one, to bring progressives and Democrats into
I
the
don't know.
Is he going to be successful in doing
It's
that?
an important thing to address, but they're already talking about their first 100 days and what they want to focus on. He's talking immigration, repealing Obamacare, and jobs. The unifying theme here was the economy. The people came out in droves because they're upset with the economic situation in the country and how they see their future, okay? And so that might have the most unifying aspect, might be, which would, for him, would be the tax plan he's talked about. But both the immigration, which is divisive, and repealing Obamacare, it's a talking point for the Republicans, an important one, but that would also be divisive for the country as a whole.
Katherine, these are the issues that a lot of the protests around the country are talking about. Many are saying, this is not my president. We don't want to ban Muslims from this country. We don't want to kick out and deport all of these immigrants. How would you gauge the mood of the country right now? Are these protests likely to continue, or are they just simply sour grapes?
I think it's in these first few moments after Election Day, as people try to process the shock and the surprise, this is the reaction that we're seeing. What's more interesting to me, having spent so much time among so many Trump supporters, is to see how they react to Trump's first 100 days. Now, a lot of these people have never voted before, have never been involved in the political process in the way that they were for this election season. What happens when they start to see a President Trump who inevitably, as all presidents do, have to make compromises, have to fight with the media? Will they support him? What will they see? Will they see the change that they voted him into office for? I'm really interested to see their reaction on that.
So once he makes his pivot, Jim, do you think Donald Trump runs the risk of perhaps alienating his base if he sort of acts a little bit more moderately on some of his campaign promises?
You know, perhaps. I'll tell you something else. I think his base is just happy he's there. I think his base, a lot of them didn't expect him to win. I think that base was driven not as much, well, by Trump, but also an antipathy toward Hillary Clinton. And this is something the Democrats are going to have to look at. How much of a flawed candidate was nominated in the end? How much of it was people just not wanting to vote for her? I think it's a lot of factors all come together. Yes, he won in the Electoral College, but the margins were not that strong in some of these key states. We are still a divided country. So you would think the idea would be to reach across the aisle and reach out. But he does have agenda items to please his base. He's got to do a balancing act.
Katherine, Donald Trump is going to be under intense media scrutiny. Given what we've already seen at some of his press conferences, what kind of a relationship do you think a President Donald Trump will have with the media?
Well, I think that, you know, when he traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet President Obama and didn't bring the pool along with him as our first clue, this is going to be a very different relationship between the president and the media. And that's what resonated with so much of his base. I mean, you went to his rallies, and some of the most enthusiastic chants were about CNN and how CNN, all the mainstream media were liars. That is really going to play well with his base, and I think it's a theme we'll see him continue as president.
I think you're right. It's going to be a very interesting time between now and the actual inauguration. So thank you very much. Jim Malone and Katherine Gypson, you two have been doing yeoman's work covering this election. We're going to take a short break right now, but when we come back, more on the election, the reaction across the globe, and how Europe and other regions are assessing the possible impact of a Trump presidency. This is The Correspondents on Voice of America.